Chapter 18, Part 3. In this video, we're going to be looking at coping strategies and coping styles that people have in dealing with stressful situations. We'll be looking at explanatory style, optimism and health. What does optimism and pessimism, how does that affect health? Management of emotions, disclosure, and then finally hardiness and resilience. And I think we will also get to Part 4 here, looking at type A personality. What does that personality, what about that personality type has them being at greater risk for cardiovascular disease? So first, explanatory styles. So personality psychologists start looking at why some people are just better at handling stress than other people. Right? They handle it better at the time, and they're able to recover more quickly than others. Right? So they start to look at a personality dimension and how people explain why things happened. Right? Whether it's good or whether it's bad. What are the pieces of why are their explanations result in more positive or negative outlooks or effects? So the dispositional way of explaining causes of events, there's 3 dimensions of attribution. Now this is not new, you would have covered this I think before in other psychology courses. So the 3 dimensions of attribution is whether something is external or internal, stable versus unstable, and local versus global. Those are the 3, right? So the first one, external versus internal. So what is the source of control or responsibility, right? So if you say, let's use the failing the test thing. If you failed the test, do you personally take responsibility for that, or do you attribute that to something external? Somebody else was responsible for that. The information was bad, the test was hard, there was trick questions in there, the professor didn't explain it very well. Okay, so do you take responsibility for the low grade, or do you blame it on something external? Unstable versus stable. Okay, is it unstable? It's a short time, or if it's a long time, something that's permanent. So is it just this, excuse me, is it pervasive? Is it just this one little spot, or is it always? Is it everything that you do, and is it over the long term? And then finally, is it specific versus global? How far-reaching the consequences are. Is it only going to be in this, like only in psychology in this one spot, or is it everything I do academically I fail at? Okay. So how you tend to attribute things. I failed the test because I didn't take, let's be more positive. I got an A on the test, not because I was lucky, because I studied. I worked really, really hard on it. I always tend to work hard on things. I put a lot of effort into things, and I do it across the board in most things in my life. I like to work very, very hard. So that would be internal, stable, and global. Okay. Different measures. There's a survey that they have. It's called the Attributional Style Questionnaire, which if you fill out this questionnaire, you can see what kind of explanatory style you have. Another way of looking at it is the CAVE method, which is content analysis of verbatim explanations. So what that is, it's not a survey, it is listening to an interview or looking at the scripts from an interview, or if it can be written as well. And what psychologists are looking at is, well, you do content analysis of what they say, but you're also looking at how they say it, what is the tone, what is their body gesturing, looking at all of those things. Moving forward with refinements that have been done further with attributional style construct is Peterson in 2000, where he coined the term attributional optimism versus pessimism. So attributional optimism, people who make unstable, specific external explanations for bad events, termed optimists, versus people who tend to, when something bad happens, they're stable. The reasons why this happened, it's stable, it always happens, it happens everywhere, and it's because I did it for bad events, terms pessimist. And then further along is dispositional optimism by Schreier and Carver, 2000, talking about expectation. So if you have dispositional optimism, then you're the type of person who says that good things are going to happen and lots of good things are going to be happening throughout my life, and the bad events are fairly rare. Versus pessimism, obviously, is going to be the opposite of that. Related to optimism, Bandura, adding to this, is self-efficacy. So the level of self-efficacy that one has directly influences level of interacts with level of optimism. So self-efficacy is the belief that one has can do the behaviors necessary to achieve a desired outcome, and you have confidence in your abilities to do it. Right? Obviously, if you're high in self-efficacy, you're more likely to be higher in optimism. Optimistic bias. People who are high in optimism tend to underestimate their risks of bad things happening in their lives, right? So, for example, they perception of risk of car crash, of heart attack, of risk of cancer, any of these negative things that could happen in one's life, optimistic people rate that that's probably not going to happen to them, right? Whereas people who are pessimistic, they tend to overestimate these things, saying that the possibility of getting in a car crash is going to be much higher. Oh, I'm probably going to have a heart attack. Oh, I'm probably going to have cancer. Okay, so that is the optimistic bias. See, the drilling has started again. The next section, I'll just speak a little louder. Next section, optimism in health. Okay, so how does being an optimistic person, how does that affect health? So optimism predicts good health and health promoting behaviors, the correlation of 0.3 to 2 to 0.3, right? Research piece, meta-analysis, they found that optimism predicts good health, survival time after a heart attack. So people with heart attacks, if they're optimists, they tend to live longer after the heart attack. They tend to have better immune system functioning. They have better cancer outcomes, and they tend to live longer lives. One study by Peterson et al., Optimism and Health Study, they had over 1,000 participants over 50 years. And what they found was people who were higher in pessimism had an earlier age of death than people who had high optimism. And further, they found that the people who did die, of the high pessimistic people, they tend to have more accidental deaths due to violent causes, especially for men. So people who are highly pessimistic tended to put themselves in situations where accidents could occur, where violent accidents could occur. Positive emotions consistently found to play an adaptive role in managing and dealing with stress. There's an association between optimism and subjective health, so better than objective health, right? So people who are optimistic tend to rate their health as being better, higher than optimism and objective health. And then finally, research is, just to say research, all of this research is correlational in nature. So the causal mechanisms involved in these health optimism links are not fully understood. Management of emotions and disclosure. So we are talking about emotional inhibition here. Okay, so some theorists suggest that chronically emotional inhibition leads to undesirable consequences. So not expressing your emotions at the time that you're having them, not expressing sadness or fear or anxiety or even have pleasurable emotions. psychologists, starting with Freud, always said that a source of psychological problems is inhibited negative emotions, so repressed emotions, right, leads to mental health issues. Other theorists, looking in a more positive light, developmental theorists, say that emotional inhibition is more positive. It's a useful skill that people have. But chronically inhibited emotion does seem to come with certain cost to the nervous system. So there has not been a lot of research on this, but the research that has been done does tend to demonstrate that people who do not express their emotions tend to have physical consequences. So a research study, participants watched movies. They had happy movies, sad movies, whatnot, and they were instructed not to show emotions. Of course, they were hooked up to machines measuring their physiological arousal. And what they found was that participants who were watching these movies, who were not allowed to show their emotions, had increased sympathetic nervous system arousal. Someone who characteristically inhibits emotion expression may suffer effects of chronic SNS arousal. Research indicates that emotional expressiveness may be good for our physiological health and adjustment. So emotional expressiveness, so showing your emotions, whether that be happiness or sadness or whatever it is correlated with higher levels of happiness and lower anxiety. Is there one center of the brain where emotional control tends to be most localized in? There's several regions of the brain, but mainly in the prefrontal cortex. So disclosure. Disclosure is the expressiveness piece. Okay, so we just finished talking about emotional inhibition, people who keep their emotions inside. Now we're speaking about disclosure, right? Telling people about private aspects of yourself, sharing stressful situations, sharing upset, sharing all of the stress that we have inside. So Penn-Baker argues that not discussing traumatic, negative, upsetting events can lead to problems, and that being open with others with our feelings can be curative. So people who repress emotions tend to have increased stress, tend to have trouble sleeping, irritability, headaches, and lowered immune system, and they are more likely to develop anxiety and depression. There was one study done with high school students. So they took the high school students and they put them in group 1 and group 2. And group 1 was instructed to take 15 minutes every night and just write about distressing or traumatic events every night, things that happen. Just write it out. Whereas group 2, they were told to also be writing, but just write about trivial events, things, not important things that happen throughout your day. And the result was that G1 felt more stressed while writing, definitely because they measured the two, of course, blood pressure, whatnot, while they were writing. G1 had more stress when writing, absolutely. But 6 months later, G1 had less illness, fewer trips to the campus health center, basically healthier in the long term. So the final of that is that just writing about your upset or stress or anxiety, anything like that, simply writing about it may have benefits on health. And then final for this situation is hardy personality and psychological resilience. So across the lifetime, people are just better at handling stress. Are some people just better at handling stress? So across a lifetime and across situations. So they have a personality type they call the hardy personality. Hardy personality, they're better able to resist the negative effects of stress and cope more effectively over time. Hardiness has been suggested to involve 3 main traits. Okay, so people who are hardy tend to see themselves as being in control of the situations that they find themselves in. They tend to have a high level of commitment. They're involved with the world around them. They're setting goals. They've got a strong sense of purpose in their lives. They are committed to doing and achieving their goals. And then finally, they have a sense of challenge. They see challenges or things that come up in their lives as problems to overcome, right? They're challenges. They're not stressors. The term psychological resilience, it's very similar to hardiness. We're talking about psychological resilience. We're talking about positive adaptation and successful coping after a stressful situation. People who are resilient, we can't bring it down to a single trait, but some people just tend to be more resilient over time. We have some research pieces here. We've got Major et al., 1998. They're saying that resilience has three main aspects of personality. They have high self-esteem, high optimism, and a sense of personal control in their life. Southwick et al., 2016. People who are high in resilience also tend to say that they have perception of social support. Right? They just say they've got a lot of social support around themselves. And then a newer one here, Osho et al., 2018, they did a meta-analysis, and what they found was that people who scored very high on resilience, so resilience is also associated with low neuroticism, high extroversion, high agreeableness, high conscientiousness, and high openness. So these are the personality traits that tend to be associated with high resilience, right? And it makes sense that people that are low neuroticism and high in these other personality dimensions that tend to be associated with more positive outcomes is also associated with resilience. Oops. That is the end of coping strategies. We'll look quickly at personality and cardiovascular disease. We're at 17 minutes, so I'm going to do that in the next video. I'll see you there.